To the second installment in our series on jealousy. And this installment is the one that the series really takes its name from, Taming the Green-Eyed Monster, a faith-based approach. Before I begin, I want to, as always, thank our video recorders from TorahAnytime.com for coming, recording our classes here at the Jewish Heritage Center of Queens and Long Island. They record me, they record Rabbi Turk, and through their good work, these shiurim are distributed through the World Wide Web to many, many people who cannot attend in person, and it's not just limited to the Jewish Heritage Center. Their work is excellent. We're very grateful to them. We wish them the greatest hatzlacha in the world. As I said last week, I'm dedicating this series to the refuah shleima of Sarah Yocheved Bas Chana Masha. Okay.
These are to take the Rand Miller series?
Yes. Okay. I see a lot of old friends, but not everybody was here for the first installment. Eventually, I'm assuming that the first installment will be available on Torah Anytime. If you're a little bit more anxious, there's usually at least for my classes, there's usually a 3 to 5 week lag between when they're recorded and when they're posted on the website. So if you need them sooner, contact me by email, and I can email you an MP3 file. However, with all this talk about technology, let's deal with the people who actually came to study Torah tonight. A little bit of a recapitulation. Every class in the series is self-standing, but a little bit of recapitulation just to know where we're at, to know what it is that we want to tame, and why it's so very vital that we tame it. The most important, the most salient points of last week's class are of the many, many differences that we described that delineate kina, the Hebrew word for jealousy, from chemda, the Hebrew word for envy or covetousness, is the idea that there is a certain kind of rage, an indignant a sense of injustice that informs jealousy. Whereas chemda, covetousness, is about possession, jealousy more often than not is about position. Whereas chemda is just desire or lust that lacked imagination and needed to see it by someone other than oneself before it could really kick in. Kina is more about the injustice of the other person's possession rather than my person's lack. It's exacerbated by the fact that I lack it as well. But it's really what we say in Yiddish, nish faginim yanim, not being able to stand the fact that the other person has it. One of the things that we concluded the class with last week was a very cryptic prayer from the great Hasidic master, the Rav Melech of Lezhensk, when he's praying for God's divine assistance in combating and dealing with his terribly inner corrosive character trait of jealousy. He says, "May it be your will, Hashem, that I not be jealous of others not be jealous of me. On the contrary, let me see other people's good points." And we were wondering, it's a very strange prayer. What do you mean, let me see other people's good points? That's like asking for God to add fat to the fire. I've been seeing other people's good points until now. That's why I'm jealous. All right? If I thought that the other person had nothing, possessed nothing, had nothing admirable, had nothing to respect, had nothing worthwhile, I wouldn't be jealous. I've been seeing their good points the whole time. And basically the conclusion of the class is, last week's class was entitled, Why do good things happen to rotten people? And the real issue is a chicken and egg question. What is first, the perception of that it's a good thing or the perception that the other person is rotten? In other words, since jealousy is about this sense of imbalance in the cosmic scales of justice, the sense of righteous indignation, something is out of whack here, somebody's getting something they don't deserve, the first and foremost approach to doing away with that question is to understand that the other person is a good person. So when we pray to God and we say, may it be your will that I see the other person's advantages, the other person's good points, rather than their bad points. Okay, we don't mean their rewards. Okay, we don't mean their popularity, their beauty, their wealth, their health. Right? We mean to see the inner goodness that might have earned them these rewards, so that we don't have a question of why is a good thing happening to a rotten person. Maybe we can hope to perceive a good person. Okay, so that was last week's approach. Tonight, I want to talk about taming the green-eyed monster, a faith-based approach, other ways and means to try to combat not just jealousy, but I think envy as well. There's going to be, where most of last week's class was devoted to distinguishing between the two, I think many of the ways and means that we're going to be discussing tonight could really apply equally to either one, to jealousy or to envy. It's certainly helpful, to bring the temperature and the blood pressure down, so to speak, to diminish something from the level of jealousy to the level of envy, but ultimately envy is not a very comfortable feeling to be walking around one's whole life with either. And that's also something that we want to address. So, first thing I want to say by way of preface is that I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a mental health care professional. Some people think I'm a mental health care patient, that's possible, but a professional I'm not. So, the proposal I want to make tonight is that the issue of taming the green-eyed monster is primarily not an emotional or psychological problem, it is primarily a religious one. Why do I say that? Where do I get off making such a assertion? Well, here it is. It's religious because the Torah prohibits it. It is the 10th commandment. The 10th commandment is, Lo sachmod, thou shalt not covet. You shouldn't be envious. And Ibn Ezra, one of the great early medieval biblical commentaries, asks a very, very basic question that should have bothered anyone who ever read that commandment with any kind of gravity, any kind of seriousness. How can you legislate emotions? How can he command me how to feel? That would seem very, very unfair of God. I understand God commanding either positively or negatively about behaviors. Eat this, don't eat that. Wear this, don't wear that. Work 6 days a week, don't work on the 7th. Behaviors I can understand. Speech I can also understand. Don't curse. Don't make oaths in vain. Do pray. Do enunciate Torah when you study Torah. Do make brachos at the proper time. This I can understand too. Speech I can understand. Even thought I can understand. The dispassionate, logical component of what it means to be a human being, God can instruct me how to think too. There's dogma in Judaism. Maimonides articulated 13 principles of faith. There's certain ways we're supposed to think. But how can you tell me how to feel? I'm not in charge of how I feel. Feelings well up in me. There are certain stimuli that stimulate certain emotional responses. And if the stimuli are there, I'm going to respond in a certain way, depending on my emotional makeup. How can you give a cut and dry, uniform law in the Torah that's supposed to tell me how to feel? And again, this is not my question, this is Ibn Ezra's question. There are other mitzvahs in the Torah that deal with emotions, but this is chronologically, I believe, the first, and it's certainly the marquee one because it's one of the 10 commandments, and it's the last of the 10 commandments, kind of the bookend to thou shalt have no other God before me. Okay. So, that's one reason why I submit to you that it's a religious problem. Had there not been any overt commandment in the Torah not to be jealous and not to be envious, there are so many narratives in the Torah where the obvious moral of the story is that jealousy is very, very destructive, that I think even absent an explicit commandment in the Torah, I could understand. It's the will of God not to be jealous. The Cain and Abel story, right? Half of humanity gets wiped out. Famous exegesis of the Talmud, when God confronts Cain, when he confronts Cain, he says, "Kol demei achicha tzaikim elai." The voice of your brother's bloods, plural, cry out to me. Why in the plural? Why not in the singular? The answer is because he didn't just kill an individual, he killed half of the human population. All the progeny, all the descendants that could have come out, theoretically, if not statistically, fully one half of the world's population that could have descended from Abel, didn't. You murdered a planet. You didn't murder one person. Right? And that was all born of jealousy. The Korach rebellion in the wilderness was based on jealousy. I could go through many other examples. I don't want to belabor the point. We're trying to get to the solutions tonight, not to the problems. All right, it's very clear in the Torah, both explicitly and implicitly, that the Torah is anti-jealousy, anti-envy. Yes, I'll take a question now before we get started.
I know and I feel and I believe that whatever Hashem says to us for our benefit.
Right.
So He doesn't want we should be jealous because we're destroying ourselves more than we destroy the person who we are jealous of.
Correct. We spoke about that last week. Wow, how jealousy of all the midos ros, of all the cataloged negative characteristics, it doesn't just destroy relationships; it destroys the person themselves, the person him or herself. Fine, that may be so, but it's still a hard thing to control. Some would say it's an impossible thing to control. Yeah.
Isn't it the reason it's a commandment is because it's actually a lack of faith?
Oh, you don't steal my thunder. Okay. All right. Let me develop this. Okay. Questions I'll take. Having my line stolen, that I cannot tolerate. I'm very jealous of my position here. I'm not into role reversal. Okay. That's setting. All right, Mr. DeMille, I want that on the cutting room floor. Okay. Fine. At any rate, there is several mishalim, several allegories that the Ibn Ezra uses to address this question. And basically the whole class is going to be an exploration of his approach and how his approach has been updated by some more contemporary Jewish thinkers. However, I want to digress for a minute and I want to bellyache for a little while about the loss of mishalim. What do I mean? A mashal is the singular in Hebrew, the plural is mishalim, the plural possessive is mishlei, and that's the name of one of the books in the biblical canon, Mishlei, Proverbs. Mishlei Shlomo ben Dovid. Solomon wrote 3 books in the biblical canon, King Solomon, the wisest of all men, and one of them is the book of Proverbs. And the truth is, the book of Proverbs really is more of a book of Proverbs than a book of parables or allegories. It's more pithy, epigrams, if you go through the book. But really what a mashal means is, okay, a mashal means what we would call a morality fable. Aesop's fables are mishalim. They're allegorical, they're symbolic. Nothing it is only what it appears to be. When you have the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise is not just the tortoise is the slow, studious, conscientious type. Okay? The hare is the very gifted, a very talented type that doesn't yet maximize their potential. And it's applicable in hundreds of different life situations. And so it is with many of those fables. Okay? And a mashal is a great tool in the written Torah itself. Okay? A mashal is wonderful for a wonderful teaching tool for 2 reasons that I can think of. Is there a bug infestation here? I see everyone waving. I don't see anything. I don't feel anything. All right, I don't know. I'm not seeing anything. Okay. I don't know how many megapixels that they have in there, but I hope they're not picking up on the flies. Okay. The first thing is that in terms of a mashal being used when in the process of giving musar, when giving moral instruction, when giving somebody a tongue lashing, and trying to arouse in them the recognition that they need to clean up their act, a mashal is a fabulous way of bypassing defense mechanisms. You get up in a room and you tell people, you're talking too much during davening. You're a bunch of stingy skinflints. You're not giving enough tzedakah. All right? They'll have 1,001 excuses, rationalizations, counterattacks. Rabbi, you also talk too much. You talk too much by your speeches. I saw I'm your accountant who you're talking to. I saw your IRS return. You didn't give enough charity last year. People have all kinds of ways of turning it around, they're getting defensive, and coming up with rationalizations, and so on and so forth. When you use a mashal, very often, okay, the recipient of your criticism is unaware that they are being criticized. Okay, the most classic example of this is when Nathan the prophet comes to King David. This is after the story of David and Bathsheba, and he gives him a parable. He says, King, the traditional role of a king, it's most famous with his son Solomon, but besides being a warrior, besides being a top politician, kings had to be judges too. There was no tripartite government like we have today, a clearly defined judiciary, executive, and legislative branch. There was a certain conflation of duties among ancient monarchs. And we know the famous Solomonic wisdom. We know Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, judging between the two women, who both claim maternity of the same baby. So he said like this. He said, King, I have a case, and I'd like to hear how you would judge a case like this. He said there were two neighbors. One was a very rich man, and one was a very poor man. Okay, a rich man in that era and in that economy did not mean what the credit score was on the three, credit agency reviews. The rich man had hundreds and hundreds of head of cattle and sheep. He was a very successful rancher. Yeah, and he had a Nebuch Schlepper neighbor with one sheep. He says, and the rich man strong-armed the one sheep from the poor neighbor. The fellow had one measly sheep, and he took away that sheep from him. He said, how should such a person be judged? And King David got indignant, and he got furious, and he actually went overboard. The truth of the matter is, you have to if the sheep's alive, you return the sheep. If the sheep's not alive, you make monetary restitution. That's the law of the Torah. Right? And King David said, off with his head. Such an egregious, greedy, the injustice of this cries out to the heavens. A person like that has to die. After King David had pronounced judgment, then the prophet said, you're that rich man. You're that rich man. You took away from Uriah Hittite his wife, you're that rich man. And King David, unlike his predecessor King Saul, when he recognized the sin, he confessed it immediately, and he proceeded to reinvent the art of tshuva. But that's a class for a different night. Okay, so one wonderful thing about a mashal is, like I said, in what it suspends disbelief, it suspends defense mechanisms. It suspends the person's defensiveness, the rationalization, the inability to recognize, what was wrong or what needs improvement. That's one beautiful thing about speaking about things allegorically. Another thing is that my Rashiva Zatzal used to say in Yiddish, he said it very pithily in Yiddish, that was edle de nimshel als grubber muzayn de mashal. In English, that means that the more abstract, the more ephemeral the idea, it doesn't always have to be that you're chastising somebody. You're trying to get an idea across, but it's very abstract. It's very spiritual. We are very material beings. And he said the more abstract and the more fine and the more delicate and nuanced the point is that you're trying to get across, sometimes the more ham-handed, your thick and coarse your allegory will have to be. Because that's just the way it is. Otherwise, it's just so abstract, and we're so poor at abstraction that you have to really make it earthy. You have to coarsen it so that people can grasp it. And the truth of the matter is that if you open up the non-halachic / on the one hand, and non-mystical literature of Chazal, the sages of the Talmud, almost everything, I'm not the statistician, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of it, but it's got to be between 60 and 70% is all mashalim. Okay, mashalim, what is this comparable? Right, this is comparable to, a shoemaker and a leather tanner. It's comparable to a tailor and a weaver. But the most common motif, the one that you see again and again and again and again, is royalty. Okay, because primarily religion is to teach us lessons about God. And one of our basic models for our relationship with God is that of a subject towards a king. So many of the Midrashei Chazal say, Mashlama Davidaima, Lamelech, what is this comparable to? What kind of a parable is this? To a king and his royal ministers, to a king and his subjects, to a king and his capital city, to a king and his far-flung provinces, to a king and the prince, to a king and the princess, to a king and the queen. It's all about royalty. And my beef is, my kvetch is, okay, that today, when we think about royalty, okay, we think of that doofus in England. I think it was over 300 or 400 years ago. I forgot which crown prince it was. I just remember reading about him that he tried to depose his father 5 or 6 times in the father's lifetime. He said, Prince of Wales is not an office, it's a predicament. And today's Prince of Wales, Charles, we've been saddled with, the Queen's 11 gesund sein, bis 120 gesunde lange Jahre, She's been on the throne, since she's 12 years old, Elizabeth? I don't know how long she's been there. And she must eat a lot of yogurt. I don't know what it is with her, but she's there. And this guy is going to be a nonagenarian, before he ascends the throne. And even at the height of his powers, he wasn't too bright or attractive. I mean, he was basically, he was fodder, for Johnny Carson for 20 years. He's there to make. I mean, first of all, we're Yankees, we're Americans. The whole institution of royalty is pretty laughable to us, right? But then, look who the royals are today. I mean, they're so, they're such easy targets, they're such easy marks. It doesn't evoke. You speak about kings and queens today, you get snickers, you get deer in the headlights looks of total, non-comprehension, right? Or you get snickers, you get laughs. You go, what are you talking about? King, royalty, exaltedness. It doesn't resonate, okay? Mashalom have to be updated, to meet the needs of the times, if you will. Okay, so, having said all of that, I'm going to share with you the Mashalom of the Ibn Ezra to address the question. Then we're going to talk a little theology, and then I'm going to tell you over from Rav Dessler how he updates the Mashal in a way that will resonate with us. The Ibn Ezra, in answering this question of how can God tell us not to be jealous, command us not to be jealous, can he legislate emotion? So he answers as follows. He says, a Yahoo, a pauper, some guy from Appalachia, okay, is not going to lust after the princess. Really? I don't know. I could see about 400 or 500 years of romantic literature going right down the tubes, if that were the correct case. From Romeo and Juliet until Jungle Fever. Okay, all the best stories are romances that cross class lines, income lines, religion, race. It's all about love conquering boundaries. Right? So you're telling me that a person should know his place? I'm just a pauper. I'm just a country bumpkin. How would I ever appeal to the princess? In his time and in his place, that mashal made perfect sense. So, and if it makes sense to you, and that's enough, you want to leave at this point? Yeah, I've answered the question already. Fine, feel free. But again, as a 21st century American-born Jew, contaminated with popular culture, it doesn't really speak to me. The next thing he says, again, it's got to be, in a certain sense, it's a little bit laughable for us. And maybe you can help me out on this. What was the name of in Greek mythology, that guy with the wax wings who flew too close to the sun and he fell and he melted?
Icarus.
Icarus? Okay, fine. So this almost sounds like Icarus over here. The Ibn Ezra says, who would be jealous of a bird? You'd have to be a madman to be jealous of a bird. Human beings walk and talk. We do a lot of things that birds cannot do. And birds fly. A human being should think about flying. I'm sorry, this is the country that gave the world both air travel and space travel. Yeah, it's only because people were jealous of birds that human beings ever took flight. Finally, he says one that does kind of hit the spot. He says, And again, this flies in the face of both Freudian psychology and some classic Sophocles plays. He says, a person doesn't lust after his own mother. Every society has an incest taboo, okay? If the Torah commanded you, okay, do not covet your father's wife, do not cover your own mother, we would understand, of course not. It's crazy. That's mom, or that's dad's wife. That's not for me. All right? So this last thing I want to say, and it's a shame one of our regulars, my Hebrew helper, isn't here tonight. But in the English language, both in the language and in the philosophy of the language, if you will, there's a very strong difference between the words can and may, or cannot or may not. Okay? Kid raises his hand, teacher, can I go to the bathroom? He says, I don't know, that's a question for your doctor. You want to know if you may leave the room right now? Then I'll address your question. If you can or you cannot, see a pediatrician. Right? Can connotes an ability, a capacity to do something, right? And may talks to legality, permission, license, and so on. Right? In the Torah, it's not so simple, the difference between the two. Let me show you what I mean. It might be in other places too, but this is one of the more famous ones. You have your Chamashim here. Open up. I didn't write the page numbers here, but I only have 2 scriptural references tonight, so it shouldn't take too long. Dvarim Tez Zayin Hey, 16:5. Give me a second. Okay, page 947. This is in Mishnah Torah, in Deuteronomy, the repetition of the first 4 books of Moses. This is the passage that basically recapitulates the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, the Passover sacrifice, the Passover offering. Okay? And there are all kinds of positive commandments about how to eat the Passover sacrifice, all kinds of negative commandments, how not to eat it. So here's one of them. Take a look at verse 5. So I'm reading from the Hebrew side first. Lo sucha lizbarach as a pasach ba'achad sharecha, asher Hashem lokecha nosen lach. And the Living Torah renders that, you may not slaughter the Passover offering in any of your settlements, which God your Lord is giving you. You may not means it's illegal. I, God, I the speaker here, I'm prohibiting you from doing so. Doesn't mean that you physically cannot take a knife to the throat of a lamb just as easily in your backyard as you could in the city limits of Jerusalem. All right? We're not talking about physical incapacity here. But nevertheless, the Hebrew word is usually translated as I cannot. You cannot. You will not be able to. Lo suchal. Okay? You have to trust me on this. Take this on faith from me. And Rabbi Kaplan, the author of the Living Torah, didn't invent this. The earliest translator, Torah Onkelos, already, instead of translating it into the Aramaic cognate of also lo suchal, you won't be able to. He translates it as les lach reshu. You will not have permission. You have no permission to slaughter the Passover sacrifice at home. Okay? Well, what is it? You may not or you cannot. The Hebrew says you cannot, but all the translators, and the obvious meaning of it, since this is a mitzvah, there's a prohibition in the Torah, is that you may not. So it's not so simple. In other words, understand the mindset of Ibn Ezra. When Ibn Ezra says, you have to look at this as an impossibility, as a taboo, as an emotional or psychological taboo. Okay? A married woman is your mother, for all intents and purposes. It's the same thing. You wouldn't think about lusting after your own mother, right? That would disgust you. That would revolt you. If the Torah prohibits another man's wife to you, that's how you have to look at it. I just want to tell you a very amazing anecdote from one of the great rabbis of the 20th century, Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein Zatzal was generally considered the supreme halakhic authority for about 50 years. For pretty much post-war America till he died. Even pre-war America, he came over, I think, in the middle 30s. He died in the early 80s, middle 80s, something like that. Anyway, he wrote a voluminous work called Igros Moshe. It's a work of genius, of breadth, of depth, of clarity. And he was the greatest writer of halachic responsa literature in the 20th century. And he was a real ish halach. He was a man who lived his life by the halach of the Torah. No compromises, no situational ethics. So the story is told as follows. He was a Rosh Hashiva. He was a Gadol Adar. He was one of the most prestigious rabbis of the generation. He was highly sought after as a Masada Kedushin. He performed many, many wedding ceremonies. A lot of other honorariums that people gave him. So he was at one of the local wedding halls. He was set to conduct the wedding. And as is often the case, if any of you who have been to an Orthodox wedding, depending on the time of the year, it's not uncommon at all for at some point, for some break in the long scheduled ceremonies, the groom's receptions, the bride's reception, the veiling of the bride, the breaking of the plate, the march down to the chuppah, there are gaps. Okay? And very often those gaps are filled with communal prayer. Let's chapa mincha, let's chapa ma'ariv, an afternoon service, an evening service, 10 men, okay, yidab mincha. Extremely common, especially by the groom's reception. Okay? So, Rav Moshe and his driver got stuck a little bit in traffic, Jewish standard. He wasn't trying to come fashionable. It was a situation beyond his control. He was very punctual, but it was a traffic accident or something. He wasn't there at the exact time that he was supposed to be there. They got there, I don't know, whatever it was, half an hour late, 40 minutes late. And his driver, his gabbai, whatever you want to call him, is like, kind of leading him in by the arm. And Rav Moshe halts all of a sudden. And he says, Rashiva, was hat auch getreten da? Why'd you stop over here? So he says, doch da Wand. He says, there's a wall here. What am I, Superman? I'm supposed to punch through a wall? There's a wall here. So, wall? What are you talking about? I don't see any wall. So Rav Moshe points, before he has a chance to explain himself, the guy says, you're the Masada Kedushin here. They need somebody to write the ksub, but they can't go on to the next step of the wedding, and we're already 40 minutes late. We should go. So Rav Moshe says, there's a wall here. What am I supposed to do? He asks him again, I don't see a wall. What are you talking about? What's the Rosh Hashiva talking about? There was a group of men davening mincha. And the rule is, the halacha is, that when somebody is praying Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the silent standing devotion, that you're not allowed to walk 4 cubits in front of the person. That's halacha. Mystically, the mystical literature says even a 4-cubit radius around the person you shouldn't walk. But certainly you shouldn't walk 4 cubits in front of him. And the only pathway that would have allowed Rav Moshe Zatzal to get to his place by the head table where he had to, ride up the ksuba, would have carried him past some of the people who were praying. I don't know if it was Mincha Ma'ariv, I don't know what time of the year this story took place. So he says, as far as I'm concerned, if the halacha says you're not allowed to go there, that's a physical barrier. There's a wall here. There was no difference in his mind between, when it came to a prohibitive halacha, there was absolutely no difference between legal allowance and physical capacity. He wasn't looking for situational ethics, he wasn't looking for loopholes, and believe me, nobody could come up with a loophole better than Rav Moshe. He found loopholes for much more serious matters than walking in front of a person by Shemona Esrei. There's a wall here. There is a barrier. It's halachic, it's theoretical, it's not physical. For him, it was the same thing. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you some examples of a truly halachic mindset where the difference between the words may not and cannot, disappear. Okay. Before I update the mashal, even though I was anticipated, let's talk a little bit of theology over here. Okay, some basic theology. Some of it is common, I think, to all monotheistic religions. Maybe some of it specifically Jewish. Well, let's set down a few postulates here. A, God exists. We believe in God. There'd be no Torah, there'd be no Torah class, there'd be no Jewish Heritage Center, there'd be no TorahAnytime.com. Nobody would be here tonight. If God didn't exist, God exists. Nobody would be here tonight for a lot of other reasons if God didn't exist, besides a lack of a revelation of the Torah. Another thing that we believe, God is almighty. Not almighty, excuse me. All-knowing, omniscient. Okay? Computers have memory capacities. Human geniuses, Einstein also had a memory capacity, an understanding capacity, a speed capacity. Right? Artificial intelligence, human intelligence, it's finite. God's infinite. There's nothing too profound that he can't grasp. There's no mystery that's not revealed to him. There's nothing so insignificant that he can't pick up on it. Some things that we don't know is not because they're beyond our ken. They're so profound. They're so, they would take such an encyclopedic breadth of knowledge to understand. It's that we don't bother with them. They're beneath contempt. They're beneath consideration. God doesn't have that limitation either. Right? Gemara says, Ad heichen tachlis yisurim. You want to know what human suffering is and what God counts for human suffering? If you stick your hand into your pocket and you wanted to fish up a quarter and you fish up a needle, did I say a needle? A nickel, right? Yeah, needle would actually be suffering. Okay? If you wanted to fish up a quarter and you fished up a nickel and you were aggravated for a nanosecond because it took you another second until you actually got the quarter, that's also deducted from your account, as it were. God doesn't miss that aggravation either. That aggravation also deducts from your suffering, as it were. Okay. So he's omniscient. Totally aware of what's going on. Nothing escapes either by dint of being too large or too small, too profound, too insignificant. It's all there. It's all in the divine mind.
I think that Hashem knows our thoughts also.
Absolutely. Like I said, nothing is secret. Next. And this is actually a halakhic definition. This is not something that we have to talk like big theologians. When a Jew learns Kriya Shema in the morning, and when a Jew davens, there are different names of God that appear all the time. And two of the most famous ones are Hashem and Elokim. What are you supposed to be thinking when you say Elokim or Elokeinu? You make a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. You say Kriya Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Elokeinu is just the possessive form of Elokim, our God, our Elokim. I don't want to say God, because God could be for Hashem as well. What does Elokim mean? In a word in English, a very good word actually, a wonderful translation here, Almighty. All powerful, Almighty. The way the halakhic literature says, the Torah says, what you're supposed to be thinking in Kriya Shema when you enunciate that word is, Baal HaKochos Kulam, the master of all powers. The one who has all powers at hand. Ready to use. Okay, till now I think I'm talking very generic. Okay, could be an imam or a man of the cloth as well, and said the things I've said until now. What Judaism teaches is that God is not only fair, but that God is good. God is merciful. God goes above and beyond the call of justice and of fairness, and that He tempers justice with mercy. God is good. The Muslims shout, God is great. We shout, God is good. And there's a special bracha, Baruch HaTov HaMeitiv. Blessed is the good one who bestows good. Okay, so now let me update the mashal, and we'll get back to actual faith-based solutions to taming the green-eyed monster. Rav Dessler is also by Eli Eliezer Dessler, one of the great Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, great Musarist, great philosopher. He's also bothered, or he finds it somewhat wanting, somewhat insufficient, the allegories that Ibn Ezra provides. No flight, princess and pauper. So he says as follows. Helene, would you mind if I had a look at your glasses? You're not using them now anyway. You don't need them, do you?
For seeing.
Well,
A distance.
well, do you have eyes up here? I saw them over there.
Yes, I do.
No, okay, fine. I was unaware. I still want to appreciate you more. Anyway, I was admiring Helene's frames. I think they're much prettier than mine. And you know what? I think I'm just going to take them. That's all.
Looks good.
How do I look?
Very good. Effective.
I can't see any of you. It's a problem. This is Rav Dessler's mashal. He says, are you going to be jealous of somebody else's eyeglasses? Okay? You can't just be jealous of the frames. Now, it just so happens, okay, usually when I do this routine, you know, they're photoson, they're shaded, they're tinted, you know, the lenses are different too, right? These are pretty much, you know, straightforward lenses here, right?
They're very low, you know.
You're no line.
Yes.
Right. Okay. When I want to remove lines, I put cream on my lenses. At any rate, be that as it may, right? It's ridiculous. These were custom made for her. It's hurting me just for the 30 seconds that I have these glasses on. And it'll probably hurt me to my eternal shame for the rest of my life. For as many people on Torah anytime who ever watch this tape, I look clownish. I look ridiculous in them, right? Besides that, right? Okay. You don't like... What?
Very nearsighted.
Yeah. You don't like the muscle of the eyeglasses? Okay, think clothing. Okay? You see somebody, she's wearing a very pretty dress. Okay? There's only one problem. You're a size 14 and she's a size 8. And the dress only goes up to a size 10. Okay? What are you going to do? You're going to take the dress off her back? You want such a dress too? She doesn't. She's rotten. She doesn't deserve that. That rightly, by rights, by justice, that dress belongs to me. You look like a clown in that dress. Be ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So Rav Dessler says, this is his updated martial view. He says, I'm taking off, you know, where Ibn Ezra left off. What he's really trying to say is, right, he's trying to sensitize people intellectually, before you work on your emotions, to the intellectual realization that whatever the other person has, whatever you see by the other person, what you covet, doesn't have to be jealousy. It could even just be envy, the lower level of envy, right? It's not just that it doesn't belong to you right now. Be careful what you wish for. If you had it, it would be useless for you. To you, be more than useless. It would be detrimental to you. Yeah. This is not what you need. You may think that that's what you need, but if you use it, you're going to look like a clown. It's going to be detrimental to you. It'll shoot you in the foot. It doesn't work that way. You're an individual. The other person is an individual. Now let's go through the 4 steps of theology that we articulated before, and then I want to talk about humanity. We've been talking about God the whole time. There's something that I really left out, a segue between creator and creature, between God and humanity. When a person doesn't realize that everything in this world, what they have or lack, what the other person has or lacks, it's all custom made. There's no off-the-rack clothing. There's no off-the-rack contact lenses or eyeglasses or eyeglass frames or shoes. Everything is custom made. Custom made to fit specifically for that person, for that soul. When you fail to realize this, you feel a lot of envy. You feel a lot of jealousy. Jealousy gives you a sense of moral indignation, of an injustice rendered, right? Pick your poison. Which one of the basic planks of theology do you want to deny? You want to talk about a human being and say that they're not there? Okay, that I can understand. If a person walked into a Kmart or a Target in New Orleans during Katrina and saw the massive looting, right? So some people might be inclined to join in, and some people would say that this is crazy. This is going to cost Kmart gazillions of dollars. It's not their fault that the levee broke, right? And this is just lawless. Where are the cops? And you look down the aisle, and the cops are looting too. There are no cops. The cops are the criminals. Very often, I think, I don't want to say anything bad. I don't want to get too highly politicized here today. But many times, in a lot of municipalities, I look around, and I think the major difference between the cops and the criminals is a badge and a uniform. Otherwise, they're pretty much in the same mindset and the same ilk of people, right? But here it was clear. There were no cops. There were cops in uniform looting the stores. And it's there on videotape. You can YouTube it. Cops looting during Katrina. So you want to say a human being doesn't exist? You want to say the police force ceased to exist? You're free to do so. But you can't say that the other quote-unquote rotten person getting wealth or beauty or health that they don't deserve is doing so because God doesn't exist. God exists. God is never on vacation. God never throws in his lot with the looters or with the unjust people. God exists. Okay, so that you don't want to say. Of course God exists. God exists. But I still want that thing, and I still want that other person not to have it, and there's still something wonderful happening to a rotten person. So what's my next choice? My next choice is that God must not know what's going on. Now, in human terms, again, there was a tremendous, tremendous failure, either at the state level or at the federal level of the U.S. intelligence community before 9/11. Middle Eastern people are taking flight lessons where they don't learn how to land. That doesn't create a red flag. There was a failure of intelligence. They just didn't know. They didn't pick up on the clues. They weren't aware of what was going on. They didn't have enough moles. They didn't have enough spies within the terror cells. Whatever it was a failure of intelligence, both literally and idiomatically.
The flight instructor's problem. That didn't get past the flight instructors at the time, though. That's the problem. It never went past the flight.
Okay, well, I could argue with you that political correctness aside, that the CIA or the FBI have to surveil suspicious aliens from terrorist countries, and not just say, well, I'm not allowed to do racial and ethnic profiling. To me, that's a failed intelligence. There were things that could have been known that weren't known. Again, you can say this about human beings, but you cannot say this about an omniscient God. You can't say that this God that we posited that existed, is unaware of the success of that rotten scoundrel. That's not true. He's aware.
But he gives us free will, and we do whatever we human beings do.
I don't understand what free will has to do with this yet.
It has to do because Hashem let human being do it's good or bad.
Right.
We should do the good, but he gives us free will to go.
To do what?
Bad, to rob the store.
What does that have to do with jealousy? I'm not getting your point. Okay, you know what? Let's
from the point.
let's hold off for a few minutes. Okay. Okay. So God exists. God knows exactly what's going on, right? But He's not all powerful. He can't redress the grievance. Look, there are a lot of good people out there, aware people out there. They'd like to do the right thing. They'd like to help. We celebrate today, 70 years later, the few and the far between. There were rescuers during the Holocaust. There was an Oskar Schindler. There was a Dag Hammarskjöld. There were people, there were rescuers. There were people who did the right thing at great bravery, great personal risk to themselves and their families, and so on and so forth. There were probably, I'm willing to acknowledge, that there were probably 10, 20, 30 times more people who would have wanted to help, but they themselves felt impotent. They felt helpless. If I try to house this Jew, if I try to smuggle them food, the Gestapo, that's going to kill me and my family. I'm not ready to do that. Or they'll reprise, they'll kill 10 times as many villagers as the Jews that we tried to save, right? So again, in human beings, you can have human beings who exist, who are aware, but they're not all powerful. They don't have the power to do the right thing. God forbid you're going to say that about God. God's afraid of somebody. God is incapable of redressing a wrong when He knows that it's a wrong. Impossible. You can't say such a thing. So what's the final poison that you can choose? God exists. He knows exactly what's going on. He has the power and the capacity, if it's wrong, and I know it's wrong, right? I, the human being, the jealous or envious human being, know that it's wrong. He has the capacity to undo the wrong, to redress the wrong, and He's not. He's not doing it. Well, what's the other possibility? If He knows about it, if He exists, if He knows about it, and He's got the might, He's got the capacity to fix things, why isn't He? The answer is, the inescapable answer, although the heretical answer is, He's a fiend. He's a Hitler. He's a Stalin. This is a corrupt government. When you have a government that's there, that knows what's going on, that has the power to improve things, and doesn't, that's our definition of evil and corruption. I want to say that about God. God forbid. Khalila. We don't believe that. So the iconic image of Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, when he's singing about how he wants to be a rich man. Right? And again, I don't think he was. I think he was maybe envious. I don't think he was a jealous personality. I don't think he begrudged the wealthy men in town their wealth. Right? I don't recall him saying a bad word about Laser Wolf, throughout the film. But he gets to the end of his song and he says, "Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man?" And the answer is yes, it would. It absolutely would. It would spoil a vast eternal plan. If you've been praying for wealth, and you've been diligently trying, you've been exercising your free will, and you've been trying to amass wealth, and it hasn't worked out for you yet, so it doesn't mean you should stop praying. It doesn't mean you should stop trying. God helps those who help themselves. Right? But if you don't have it right now, that means in the vast eternal plan of things, this is what's just, there's more than what's just, this is what's good, this is what's good for you, this is what's good for the few privileged ones who are wealthy now. This is what has to be. There is no injustice, there is no imbalance. But there is, maybe it's there for you to try on a human level, to try to address it, to try to redress it, to try to change it. Right? But the notion that God is being unjust, that God is being a fiend, or that God would like to help things, but he's got his hands tied, God forbid, that's an anathema. Okay? And finally, just let me just get in point number 5, and then I'll take some questions. Finally, another thing that I didn't in my original talk about theology, I didn't spell this out. And let's look at this. This is really a segue between God and human beings. And that is, every human being is as individual as a snowflake. One of the things that our sages in the Talmud say, Ein tzur kelokenu, there is no rock unto God like God. Okay, our sages say, don't read that word in Hebrew, tzur, which means a rock, a pointy, like a sharp, jagged rock. Read it tzayir. There is no artist. There's no artisan like God. Why? Because every other artist and every other sculptor casts a die, right? Has a mold, has a form, right? And then everything's a clone. Everything that comes out of that mold is identical. He says, and God cast a die, to wit Adam and Eve, right? And nevertheless, everything that comes out is unique and individualized and has a different mix of nature and nurture. So finally, another thing that jealousy and envy offends, besides all the theological offenses involved, like I said, pick your poison, right? Is that you're insulting humanity, and in so doing, you're insulting the creator of humanity. You're not respecting your own individualism, and you're not respecting the other person's individualism. I want to tell you a great Chassidish story. Okay, we'll take a little break after that. I still have a little bit more to say, but I'll take a few questions at that point. The Rabbi Zisha of Anipoli was dirt poor in a time, in an era, and in a country of hard-scrabble poor Jews. Everybody was poor. Right? A friend of mine had a Zayda who used to tell him like this. He said, "Schul, I want you to know, in the old country, there is no middle class. In every town, in every state, in every state, there was a few fabrikanten, a few gvirim, factory owners, rich people, and everybody else was scrambling, working their heads off to make a living. People were so poor, you can't imagine." Okay, impressive. He says, "So Zayda, what was your family?" He says, we was middle class. Right? Okay, so I'm not here to tell you there was no middle class, but the middle class was a lot narrower than a middle class in the late 20th, early 21st century America. Suffice it to say, in the times of Zisha of Anipoli, in the early 1700s. Anyway, the man was dirt poor. He wore rags. His shoes were full of holes. He couldn't even afford to go to a shoemaker and get his shoes resold. Anyway, a Misnagid is visiting in Mezrich. He's by his Rabbi, the master, the Maggid of Mezrich. And a Misnagid is coming to attack the Maggid of Mezrich about the Hasidic movement's propensity for a lack of decorum in prayer. Nowadays, they shuckle. In the early days, it sounds like the early Chassidim used to somersault in the middle of davening. It was just wild, totally wild. The early Hasidic shuls. All right. So he says, and also, what's all this joy about? Yeah, I know. There's a pasuk in the Torah and the Torah, because you didn't serve your Lord with a joyous heart when things were good. Things are not good from right now. We're in Golus. We say in the Psalms, then when Messiah comes, then our mouths will be filled with laughter. It's a halach in Shulchan Aruch. It's forbidden to fill your mouth with laughter in this world. What are you guys laughing about? What are you so happy about? So he says, you're asking me? Go ask Zisha. Who's Zisha? That beggar over there. He's trying to keep his knees from knocking together. He's by the wood-burning stove over there in the corner of the shul. He walks up to Reb Zisha, and he hears him joyously reciting the Birchas Hashem. Blessed are you, O Lord, who gave me the seichel to distinguish between day and night. Blessed are you who opens up the eyes of the blind. What? Finally he gets to the bracha, who provided me with all my needs. And specifically, those brachas are really phenomenological. In the olden days, you used to say them in sequence. When you would open up your eyes in bed, then you'd make the bracha, who restored the sight of one. When you'd sit upright, you'd say, Zeikei Kfufim, who makes the bent upright, and so on and so forth. Now we say them in a row. But originally, they were instituted by Anshe Knesset Agdol to be said phenomenologically as you go through your morning hygiene, your morning, with the bracha of Shalas Li Kol Tzarki, who provide me with all my needs, is specifically that I am shot, that I have a pair of shoes. The guy looks at Reb Zisha's shoes, there are holes on the bottom, there are holes on top. He can't contain himself anymore. He slaps him across the face. Ligner? This is an impudent liar, I'm not saying don't say the bracha, it's printed in the Siddur, but say it with a little humility. You're like mocking God. You make the bracha on shoes with shoes like that? So Reb Zisha looks at the guy and he says, obviously, my need is poverty. God is providing me with all my needs. What my neshama needs is poverty. That's what I need. That was a happy man. That was a man without a jealous bone in his body. Doesn't mean, do you think that when he davened, he was a family man too. He had a wife and kids to provide for. He wrote a Tanai Ksuba. I'm going to provide for my wife Bekuvit. They should be dressed properly. They should have shoes on their feet. You don't think he prayed for a good, sturdy pair of shoes for him and his family? He prayed for it. But until the prayer is answered, I'm not going to be broken up over it. I'm not going to be broken up over it, even if I'm sure he had a lot of friends who were in a similar state of affairs too. But the Rebbe of Zisha, I'm sure, would have been capable of saying that bracha joyously, even if he lived in 21st century America. He would say, what am I being discriminated against for? Everybody else has a solid pair of shoes. I have to be the one schlepper that the rain rains in. My need right now is for this moment. I don't think, like I said, it didn't mitigate for 1 second. 15 minutes from now, after the morning blessings, he's going to daven Shemona Esrei, the silent devotion. He's going to present God with all his needs. I need tshuva. I need parnasa. I need to repent. I need a good living. I need good health. You can't be too healthy with holy shoes in the middle of the winter either. Now you're going to catch a lot of colds. You're going to catch the H1N1 virus. Yeah? But for that moment in time, he was at peace with himself. At that moment in time, he wasn't casting a jaundiced eye about everyone around him more fortunate than himself. That wasn't how he operated. He didn't just speak the faith game, he felt the faith on a visceral level. And this is the way he was able to deal with taming his greed-on monster. Okay, I have a little bit more to go. Do we want to wait to the end of the class? Somebody wants to ask a question now here. I'm between thoughts right now, so if somebody wants to ask a question, I'm going to take a question. Okay. No? Okay. So let's go another 5 minutes. I have to truncate it. I see we started late and I'm talking too much, so...
Next week you're going to answer the question why Hashem give to the bad and not give to the good.
No, that question is unanswerable. Next week, I'm going to answer the question of why we have jealous bones in our body altogether. Can we use jealousy for something constructive? That's the topic next week. Okay. I want to end with two thoughts. Okay?
Can I say something?
One is, no, after the class. That's it. I gave you that opening, now I got to finish. Now I smell the finish line. Okay. Two thoughts I want to leave you with. One is a very beautiful explanation that I think really brings this point to the forefront of jealousy and combating jealousy, and what it means really to combat jealousy is this recognition of not divine injustice, but a recognition of ultimately divine justice and goodness. We know that the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, wore a jeweled breastplate. Huh? What we may not know, we may not be so familiar with, is that besides the obvious adornment, the prosaic function of it was to glorify, to beautify, arguably the highest office that the Jewish people had. It's either that or the king of Israel. Those are the two highest offices. So the Kohen Gadol wore this jeweled breastplate. It had an adornment aspect to it, but it also had a kind of a supernatural judgment aspect to it too. Between the folds, there was a cloth fundament upon which they placed these settings for the 12 stones and the 12 stones that was the breastplate. And in the folds of that cloth, there was something called the Urim V'Tumim. And the Urim V'Tumim worked like, kind of think of it as a battery flashlight with an LED display. The best way to explain it with modern high tech. There were times when Sanhedrin, when the Supreme Jewish Court, was stumped about things, okay? And there was something called Shelas Urim V'Tumim. In the presence of the Kohen Gadol and in the presence of the king, they would put questions, as it were, directly to God. God, direct us. Okay? How should we rule in a case like this? Usually, it was extra legal, it was more political things. It's should we go to war? Shouldn't we go to war? But therefore, the garment that was the whole the breastplate construct, the breastplate together with this folded material and the Urim V'Tumim was known as the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate of judgment or of justice. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu did not feel the calling. Moshe Rabbeinu was a very reluctant messenger of God, a very reluctant prophet. He gave God a hard time. Yeah, for a very long time, while God was telling him, I want you to be a prophet, I want you to be a redeemer, I want you to be my messenger to Pharaoh, to the Jewish people. I'm heavy of mouth, I'm twisted of tongue, all kinds of excuses. Right? One of the things that he intimated was, God, you're going to create a dysfunctional family. I have an older brother. He's been the prophet in the family up until this point. Right? Basically, you're asking me to leapfrog my older brother. Right? Don't we have enough stories in the first Chumash of jealous brothers? We have Cain and Abel. We have Yitzchak and Yishmael. We have Yaakov and Esav. We have Yosef and all of his brothers except for Binyamin. You want that again? God gets angry. God says, I'll show you. Let's see the pasuk inside. This is Shemais Daled Yudaled. Give me a minute. No, I'm back to Bereshis already. Shemais Daled Yudaled. Okay. Take a look on page 275. Let's actually start from verse 13 on page 275. I beg you, O Lord, exclaimed Moses, please send someone more appropriate. Okay, whenever you have that asterisk, that means you're supposed to look in the footnote. Send Aaron, the one you usually send. That's how Rashi interprets it, if you see the footnote. Send someone more appropriate. Verse 14, God displayed anger towards Moses. Is not Aaron the Levite your brother, he said? I know that he knows how to speak. He is setting out to meet you, and when he sees you, his heart will be glad. V'racha v'samach b'libay, the poetic words in Hebrew state. He will see you, and he will be glad. That doesn't just mean that pro forma he'll go through the social niceties, the good manners of congratulating you on your great good fortune that you were promoted over him. In his heart, I, God, who can see into people's thoughts and emotions and hearts, in his heart he'll be glad for you. He didn't have a jealous heart. He didn't have a jealous bone in his body. Rashi on this verse says, the heart that was able to see the success of his brother. I think I quoted the Gore Vidal last week. Gore Vidal said, every time I see one of my friends succeeding in life, I die a little bit. Okay? That's not the Jewish way. Jewish way, like I said, is to try to diminish, to tame the green-eyed monster. So Rashi says, a heart that was capable of seeing this unbelievable, historic, once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a humankind, I should say, success of his younger brother, and not to sense any jealousy, that heart will be adorned with the jeweled breastplate. So the Maharal of Prague, who wrote a super commentary on Rashi, says it a little bit deeper. He says, a heart that's devoid of jealousy recognizes the justice of divine justice. If you feel that there's an injustice, you're going to be jealous. It's two sides of the same coin. If you're not feeling jealousy, that means you've got all your theological and human duckies lined up, as it were. You believe in God, you believe in His omniscience, you believe that He's almighty, you believe that He's just and good, and therefore there's nothing to be jealous. And you believe in your own individuality and in the other human beings' own individuality, and that God's capable of creating people. You can't say equal pay for equal work, because there is no such thing as equal work. Everyone's work is different. Everyone's task is different. Even if it looks to you as being identical, it's not. If you remember last week, those of you who were here last week, feelings of jealousy are predicated on a sense of peerage, on a sense of sameness, of equality. Sisters are jealous, brothers are jealous. We have the same nature, we have the same nurture, we should have equal treatment. All right? A heart that's not feeling any jealousy is alive with the recognition of divine justice. It's not just a jewel, an adornment. This is the breastplate of justice, of judgment. This is where, so to speak, the buck stops here, the final interpretation of the Constitution. This is our Supreme Court, this jeweled breastplate. The answers, the questions that no Sanhedrin can answer, get answered over here. This is the ultimate in divine justice. That's going to adorn this heart. The heart that senses divine justice will be the conduit of divine justice. That's how the morale says it. I think I'd be remiss tonight. It's a little bit late, but I'll try to make it fast. If you remember, both in the standard prayer book and in Elimelech of Lezhensk prayer, parenthetically, Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk was a brother of the Rebbe of Zisha, the other Tziddik master I quoted tonight. They both pray for two things. We shouldn't be jealous of others. The jealousy of others shouldn't arise on our hearts. And our jealousy shouldn't arise on another person's heart. What's that all about? If I've tamed my own demon, if I'm not sensing jealousy, the other guy's jealousy is the other guy's problem. Well, let him or her pray for to have their jealousy diminished. What does that have to do with me? So, there's a lot of things that we have to think about in terms of what is commonly called in modern American culture conspicuous consumption. Mm-hmm. Right? This prayer is very, very against, the zeitgeist of our times. We live in a world and we live in an era of ostentation, of showy displays, of that bumper sticker that says the best revenge is living well. But if you're living well and you're concealing how well you're living, it's not a very good revenge. The best revenge is living well, and everybody else knows about it. Right? Everybody wants the summer home in the Hamptons, the Mercedes in the driveway, the trophy spouse. All right? Whatever it is, if you got it, you want to flaunt it. Okay? You're not keeping it hidden. You're not keeping it under wraps anywhere. But we're praying that it shouldn't be that way. Obviously, you're talking with forked tongue if you are a big practitioner of conspicuous consumption, and then you're praying to God, oh, and by the way, make sure that other people aren't jealous of us. Well, if you want other people not to be jealous of you, maybe you ought to adopt a more modest discreet lifestyle, if you want other people not to be jealous of you. So, I want to talk briefly about this. Number one, somebody who really has the jealousy bug licked is not into conspicuous consumption. You fight fire with fire. You fight with the weapons that are meaningful to you. Okay? If you aren't capable of having jealousy towards another person, you're not thinking of terms of how do I arouse jealousy in somebody else. Right? And some people don't cop this, till they breathe their last. There's a classic comedy routine by the Yiddish comedians Jiggin and Schumacher. Jiggin walks into a monument engraver, right? And the secretary is taking the order from over here. He just buried his second wife, and he's buying a headstone for her, right? So the woman asks, so what kind of a headstone do you want? You want granite? You want marble? So he says to her, so rasen deugen, alle so chalischen, geben es he says, it should rip people's eyes out. All of her friends who come to visit her at the cemetery, they should faint that away at how beautiful her headstone is. The woman's 6 foot under. You think they care? They're living. You think they care about her headstone? That's how it is, People have conspicuous consumption even while they're being consumed, Right? The worms are eating them, and they're worrying that other people should eat themselves up. Right? So, that's number one. Don't delude yourself into thinking that if you still have all kinds of schemes of machinations about how you're going to arouse jealousy in others, that you've kicked the habit yourself. It doesn't work that way. A person who is out to arouse jealousy in others is still jealous themselves. You may be the big fish and you're a small pond, but one day you'll get to another pond where you're not such a big fish, and the shoe will be on the other foot. You'll be the jealous one. You'll not be the one arousing jealousy in others. That's number one. Number two, and maybe this is what you were referring to when you spoke about free will. If you live a conspicuous consumption life, you're falling into the fatal trap described in Chumash of Kochi v'otzem yadi asli as. It's my might and it's the craft of my hand that wrought all of this for me. That is not a Jewish attitude. That's not a Jewish concept. We live in America. There's the land of opportunity. We're all good card-carrying, right-wing Orthodox Republicans, right? We all believe that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and so on and so forth, right, Mom? Yeah, most religious Jews, that's their politics. It didn't used to be that way a generation ago. Everyone was a Democrat. But today people are drifting towards what's left of the tattered Republican Party, so to speak. But anyway, this idea of self-sufficiency and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and so on and so forth. You know what that's called? That's called the Protestant work ethic. That's not the Jewish work ethic. The Jewish work ethic is, I can't sit with my hands folded. God helps those who help themselves. All right? God's not going to just let me sit around and do nothing and bestow all the goodies upon me. I've got to go through the motions of causality. I definitely have to work hard because that's the way He set up nature. It should look like it's cause and effect. The harder you work, the longer you work, the more you profit, the more you gain. But I know it's a mirage. I'm a Jew. I know there's an illusion. There's no connect the dots. There's no direct correlation either between my smarts or my effort and how well I do. Don't we all know? Don't we all have a cousin somewhere, a brilliant PhD, who's still living with mom at the age of 50 because they can never hold down a job? The wisest of all men, King Solomon said, "Lo l'chachamim lechem." There's no bread to the wise, to the smart. The Kotzker Rabbi used to say, he says, you know why there's no bread to the smart? Because God says to the smart guy, Bist du chazai klieg, mach dich allein das bread. He says, you're such a smart aleck, such a wise guy, you make your own bread. I'm staying out of your affairs. Let's see how well you do without me. The downfall of the famous potential Mashiach, potential Messianic figure, the Rabbi Akiva, no less of a figure than Rabbi Akiva believed in, Bar Kochva. Our sages tells the man's downfall was that before his last epic battle he said, God, I'm not asking you for help, just don't help my enemies. I'll be fine on my own. You won't be fine on your own. The first Slonim Rabbi said, with Hashem's help, I can cross an ocean without a ship. says, without his help, I can't get over the threshold of my own door. And that's what a Jew has to believe. So if that's your attitude, even if you're lucky enough, you're lucky is not the word, you're fortunate enough, Hashem decided in His vast eternal plan to make you the rich man. All right? But that doesn't accrue to your virtue, to your smarts, to your energy. It may look like that. Again, there's got to be free will. It's got to look like that, or none of this would be a challenge. But a Jew in their heart of hearts has to believe it's all from Hashem. A person with a modicum of shame, a person with a modicum of humility, right? If they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth, if they're fabulously wealthy, and they didn't do anything, to earn it. They didn't build the company up from scratch. I'm a trust fund baby. I got it from granddad. All right? So you're going to go around crowing about, how wealthy you are and how wonderful you are and how, your great ingenuity. You're holding a patent, from 50, 60 years ago. So you're still earning royalties, so to speak. Or the trust fund is already, into perpetuity. So if I'm into conspicuous consumption, essentially what I'm saying is, the glory is not God's, the glory is mine. That's another reason why we have to pray, save me from arousing jealousy in others. And finally, and this is the most important, are the words of the Orchos Tzaddikim. There's a concept in Judaism, for those of you who don't remember, the Orchos Tzaddikim, again, is one of the great medieval ethicists, and he's the one who had the mashal, the parable, the difference between the Balkin and the Balchamda, about knocking the other guy's eye out. And for those of you who weren't here last week, you'll ask me after the class. I just want to remind the fellows who were here last week. The Orchos Tzaddikim says as follows: there's a prohibition of the Torah, it's not a commandment. Thou shalt not put a stumbling block before the blind. And our sages interpret it that what that means is you don't aid and abet another person in their sin. Okay? It's forbidden. I keep kosher. I know a Jewish person who doesn't keep kosher. They say, could you pass me the pork? You're not allowed to pass them the pork. Okay? I'm a Jewish barber. A guy comes in, he says, I want a mohawk. I want you to take a razor and shave my payas off. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to aid and abet or bait another Jew to do it. It's not just another Jew. You're not allowed to sell guns or idolatrous icons to non-Jews, because that's tempting them to transgress one of the Noahide laws. Murder in one case and idolatry in the other case. You are not allowed to be the cause of the spiritual ruination of another person. There's a famous Gemara at the beginning of Makos that says as follows: the Torah prescription for a premeditated murder is capital punishment. For an accidental murderer is galus, exile into a refuge city. Okay? In biblical and Talmudic times, there were refuge cities populated by the Levium, by the Levites, where accidental murderers, manslaughters could run, and there was a safe place. They could go there for refuge. What happens, the Talmud and Tractate Makos says, if someone committed manslaughter and there were no witnesses, and another fellow committed premeditated murder and there were no witnesses? So how does God, the divine puppeteer, arrange things? He makes sure that both of these people show up to the same end. The manslaughterer is at the top of the stairwell, and the premeditated murderer is at the bottom. Guy at the top slips on a banana peel, whatever, a railing gives way. While he's descending, he tumbles down in such a way that he crushes the guy at the bottom fatally. And it's an inn, it's a tavern, it's full of people, it's full of witnesses. So, the premeditated murderer got what was coming to him, and the manslaughterer will now get what's coming to him. Now he did it in a room full of witnesses. A second manslaughter, he'll have to go to the refuge city. And the sages conclude, they say, Magalgalin schus alidei zakai, v'chav alidei chayiv. Hashem could have, so to speak, offed the premeditated murderer in hundreds of different ways. Okay? He could have accidentally slipped and fell. He could have gone to sleep at night and never gotten up in the morning. Okay? There's no lack of imaginative ways that Hashem could have visited this punishment without an intermediary, without a puppet, without a conduit. Didn't need a hitman, so to speak. In a certain sense, God is hiring a hitman over here. Right? But the Talmud teaches us, God chooses his conduits according to their merit or demerit. If there's something good that has to come down in the world, the messengers of God to deliver good have some goodness to them. If there's something evil, if there's something rigorous or in the field of punishment that God has to bring into the world, the people, the vehicles, the conduits for punishment are themselves guilty people. Okay? You don't want to be the gun that shoots the bullet that kills another person. When you arouse jealousy in another person, you're causing them to sin. Just as easily as if you would serve them a piece of treif meat. Just as easily as if you would help them on with a coat that's a wool linen combination. When you are a conspicuous consumer and you arouse jealousy in another person, you're like the guy tumbling down the steps, killing the other guy. Maybe they're the one sinning directly. Maybe they're the one guilty of the 10th commandment, of transgressing the 10th commandment. But it came about through you. That's not something you want to be either. So we don't just pray to God, you should save us from sin. Save us from jealousy that we feel towards others. You should save us from being the objects of other people's jealousy as well. And I hope that this class has been helpful in some way besides obviously asking for divine intervention, praying to God that He should help us out this way, that we have some ways and means of taming the red-eyed monster ourselves. Okay.